I want you to imagine that you have a fairly simple process with a fairly simple data declaration. So data 1 is just a string that happens to be JSON. Data 2 actually is JSON. And data array is an array of JSON. So let's say we happily put all of this into our Camunda application. We come over here, we create a script task, we mark it as JavaScript, and we happily put all this in. What actually happens inside of Camunda? Well, I'll deploy this, I'll run it, and we'll see that within the context of Camunda, data 1 is stored as a string. Data 2 is actually stored as a truffle polygon map, which I'll come back to later. And data array is just stored as an empty item, which is not at all really what we were hoping for. So what's happening here? Well, Camunda, especially using the Grail JVM engine, doesn't really understand that you want the first thing to be stored as a JSON array. It just treats it like a string. The second entry, so this one right here, it does know to treat this like an object, but the third one it has no idea with. Now, why is this important to you? It's important to you because if you decide to use any of this inside of an expression, so for example, let's say that we want to check to see if we've been approved. And we've decided that our criteria for improvement is that this fella checks to see that data 1 is approved, and this fella is the no path, the default. So if we come here, we save it, we deploy it, and we run it, we're going to see that it actually broke. It broke because it does not recognize that data 1 is approved. Why? Because data.isApproved is the way that you would treat an object and not a string. So in order to actually parse this, you would have to do some sort of complicated spin or parse XML functionality. I'm way too lazy for that. So this is the way that I solve that problem. I'll come in and I will just add one line declaring a hash map, and then I will parse that content into the hash map. So I will just come here, I'll copy in my logic, I'll save it, and I'll run it. And what do you know? That actually worked because I took data 1 and I transformed it into a hash map. And when I have a hash map in JavaScript, I can use dot notation. So over here on line number 1, I declared a hash map, and on line number 11, I told Camunda, hey, I want you to parse this string as if it were JSON and put it into a hash map. Okay, that's great. Now, what about the second item? So if I wanted to treat the second item, now what if I came here and I wanted to use data 2? I would change this, and I'll change this to be a human task. I'll save it, I'll deploy it, I'll run it, and you can see here that it did what we expected it to do. Now what about the third item? I gave it an array of JSON, but Camunda was not able to actually parse that and treat it like an array. How do I deal with that? Well, again, because I'm lazy, what I will do is I will transform that into an array list that contains hash maps. So here's what I'm going to do. On line number 14, I'm going to declare an array list. Line number 15, I'm going to create a temporary variable to point to that data array. Line number 16, I'm going to redefine the data array to be an array list type. 17, I'm going to see how many items are in the array. Now we know that it is 2 in this case, but it could be any number. Line 18, I'll loop through all of them. And what I'll do here is I will get the very first item. I'll transform it into a hash map, but just passing it into the constructor of a hash map. So remember, temp at this point is a polygon map, but I can use it as part of the constructor of a hash map, which will create the hash map. And then I will put that item into that data array. Once I'm done with that, I'll just save them all in the execution context. And then going back over here, I'll paste all this in. I'll save it. Change that to data array. I'll save that. I'll deploy it. I'll run it. And you can actually see here that I ended up the happy place because the first item of my array actually was an apple. Now this is a trivial example, but the important point in all of this is that you're going to get data from multiple different sources. You're going to get them from connector calls and messages and reading information from the database and people entering information and RESTful APIs coming into you. And all of that is going to be hectic. And if you don't normalize your data, if you don't treat it in such a way that you can always use dot notation, you're going to end up with some problems. My advice is to always transform your objects that are non-primitive either into a hash map or to an array list of hash maps. And that way you'll be able to use dot notation as you're going through your solution, and you won't have to get caught up with the grammar and the trivia, and you can focus on your business logic.